African Entrepreneurs podcast.
All right. So today I have the pleasure of interviewing Logan Bailey. So Logan, welcome to the African Entrepreneurs at Berkeley podcast.
Thank you, Rahmat. It's an honor to be on here.
So before we get started, I have something that I wanted to share with you. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes, I can.
Do you recognize these two teenagers on this yearbook picture?
Yep, I do. I do.
So why don't you tell the audience a bit about this picture and so they can have a bit more context on how we met or how we know each other.
Okay, so we know each other since primary when we used to go to Lycée Gabriel Mariam, the French school in Addis Abeba. But that picture was taken 1 year before graduation, where we had both transferred to ICS, International Community School, and that's where we both graduated from.
Yeah, so we've known each other for, I don't know, like decades. And look at us now. I feel like, exactly. And look at us now. I don't think time has weathered us too much. So it's been a long time. Yeah, maybe you a bit more than me.
For sure.
But Logan, so before we talk about your journey and your company, I just want our audience to get to know you a bit better. So I know your connection to the African continent is more than just professional, and it's in your DNA. So your mom is Eritrean, Italian, and I would love to hear how her journey has shaped yours, if you'd like to share a bit more about that.
Of course. So my mom was born in Asmara, Eritrea. At the time that she was born, Ethiopia and Eritrea were one country. She met my dad, who was working there with the UN. They fell in love, then they moved to the States for a few years. Then they returned back to Eritrea. My dad then went to work in Sudan, and that's where I actually was conceived. And so I was born in the States in Memphis, Tennessee. But when I was a few months old, my mom came back to Eritrea. Then when I was about 2 years, there was a civil war, the War of Independence, and we were caught in Ethiopia, and we were very lucky that my dad had diplomatic status, because at the time the Ethiopian government was looking for Eritreans and rounding them up and arresting them. So after that, basically we never returned to Eritrea until I was 18 years old. So I grew up in Addis, Ethiopia, and that's the country, the culture that shaped who I am today. Inadvertently, the war separated families, and my family was no different. And so I grew up with my mom. She was a single mom. So at the end of the day, it was me and her, and relying on each other to keep going.
Oh, wow. Who would have thought how history can shape one person's life in such an extreme way, but also bring people closer in an adversary. So thanks for sharing that. So as you mentioned, you grew up in Ethiopia, and I believe you also studied biology in the US, where you went to Southern Baptist University. So looking back at your journey and also the path that you're in now, did you have any early signs that you would become an entrepreneur and start your own business? Or did you expect that you would take a more traditional path?
Not at all. Not at all. I went to the States with the mindset of either going to vet or medical school. So with my biology degree, I had taken all the pre-med requirements. But by the time I was reaching my fourth year of university, I was very tired of going to school, and I decided that wasn't for me. So at that point in my life, I started to think of what I wanted to do. And so, having worked in the States, I realized I had three options: either continue my studies or find a job with my bachelor's degree in biology, or return to Ethiopia to do something. The first option, as I mentioned, I was tired of school, so I didn't want to continue to vet or med school. The second option of working for somebody, I had worked a lot of different jobs during my summers when I was free, from forestry to restaurant work to lab work, and all of them had this underlying theme that made me not want to continue living and working in the States. I know it sounds crazy. Everybody wants to go to the States, but I realized it wasn't for me. I felt that I was a cog in the machine and that at any moment I could be replaced. And I realized that all my time and effort was going towards somebody else rather than myself. So that's when I made the decision that I wanted to return back home and do something more.
I think you're lucky that you're able to at least understand what these options were and you were very clear on what you wanted to get out of your life. Because I don't think everyone is able to come to that conclusion as fast as you did. So I think that's definitely something that you're super lucky and I guess smart that you did. So I guess fast forward to today, as you mentioned, you're in Uganda and you're running your own company called Victoria Silk Company. So in the simplest term, how would you explain what your company does and what you're trying to create with your work?
So what my company does is produce silk cocoons for exports. That's how I would phrase it in one sentence. As for our impact, the company was formed 4 years ago. So we're still in the initial phases of things, and we're not quite where we want to be yet. But ideally, the reason I chose silk is because it's the world's largest cottage industry. For those who are not aware of what that means, it means that it's an industry or a production or a job that can be done from home. And the whole idea was that my farm would serve as a pilot, and then I would then transform the rural livelihoods of the people around me by providing them with education, training, raw material, and guidance. And so I would be their input supplier and I would also be their market so they wouldn't have to worry about anything. And that's the change I eventually want to bring about.
Yeah, I really love how there's a mission aspect of what you're trying to build as well. That's even outside of just the day-to-day business components. Um, so now that we understand a bit about what you're doing, I actually would like to go back and talk a bit more about how this all started. So people usually think that being an entrepreneur is about having a spreadsheet and like a 5-year plan. But I know your start was less formal, I would say. So can you take us back to that like moment when the idea for this business started and maybe share what that moment looked like for you?
Okay, so it's a pretty funny story. It was coming to my last semester in the States before graduation. And I knew I didn't want to stay there, like I mentioned before, but I also didn't know what I wanted to do. All I knew was that Ethiopia, a few years ago, had really great incentives for investors. You could acquire land very cheaply because all the land in Ethiopia is state-owned, so you could lease it for a very minimal amount. The bank lends money and the collateral is the items you purchase itself. And on top of that, the interest rate is lower than the inflation rate. So if you're an exporter, you basically have negative interest. So I knew I wanted to return to Ethiopia, but I didn't exactly know what to do. But I was kind of on the path or the idea of something agricultural because my mom, she had experience in working in the flower industry. She was a farmer, a flower farmer, and they were exporting to the Netherlands. So I knew I wanted to do agriculture, but I didn't want it to be flower farming. I had to think of something else. And so I always had this thing, this thought in the back of my head going about my everyday life. But the actual conception of the idea was really funny. Being my last year, I had moved off campus and I just had a little get together with my friends, after school fun. And so after all my friends left, I was cleaning up and one of my friend's girlfriends, she left her scarf. And when I picked it up, I felt that it was so soft and it felt different than most scarves. And in my mind, I was like, I bet, I bet this is silk. And I checked the tag and it was 50% silk. And in my not so sober state of mind, curiosity got the better of me. And I started to investigate what silk is actually made from because I had no idea at that point. So it was like the rabbit hole in Alice in Wonderland. I dove into it, found out that it could be done on a small to large scale. It had huge market potential because in China, the middle class is growing and they can afford more things. But not only that, silk farming is really labor intensive and it requires a lot of manpower, which Africa has in abundance. And also, less people are into silk farming. They're converting the land into food because land is becoming more expensive into China. So the demand is increasing, but the production is decreasing. And so the market gap continues to widen every year. So I felt that was the perfect thing to do.
I love that story because I think it's a reminder for even future entrepreneurs that there's no point waiting for that perfect moment, that calculated moment. Like sometimes the best ideas just come when you least expect it in the most unassuming way. And I think your story just highlights that even more. So I know you touched a bit more. So I know you touched on. Oh, go ahead.
No, I think
Go ahead.
one key aspect to keep in mind in all of this is to be curious, to not just accept things, but to really dive into and answer every possible question that your mind can come up with.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I know you talked a bit more about how your mom had experience being an entrepreneur in agriculture in Ethiopia. But I'm curious to learn a bit more, like how did you end up in Uganda? Why not start the business in Ethiopia?
So that's another story of chance. Basically, after I finished my education in the US, I returned to Ethiopia and started doing my feasibility study, my groundwork, my research. I knew I had to do this idea, but I didn't know how to approach it. So when I was in Ethiopia, I went to the Ministry of Agriculture and they basically told me you have two options. One is a tiny farm in Bahar Dar, and the other is at a vocational school in Alage behind Abiata Shala National Park. I wrote to the guy in Bahar Dar and I never got any answers. Then I called the people in Alage and I was so lucky because in that vocational school, they had an exchange program with the Chinese government, and the Chinese government was sending officers to the school to teach different subjects. They had like animal husbandry, they had agriculture, they had fisheries management, And one of the things was also sericulture, silk farming. And I found this lady that had more than 30 years of experience. And when I called her, she was so happy because in all her years in Ethiopia, I was the first and only person that said, "Hey, I want to learn. Can I come?" So it was just a phone call. She was very glad to receive me. Then when I got there, we got along so well together because I am the same age as her son. So she just took me in as if I was her child. And she taught me all the technical aspects. Um, However, I wanted to do a larger scale application. In this vocational school, they only had 4 hectares of land, if I remember correctly. So it's very small.
Okay.
So after learning all the processes and technical details from her, I wanted to expand my knowledge and learn how to do it on a much larger scale, how to amp up production. Because doing something like a few silkworm boxes versus multiplying that by 100 has very different implications. Then again, I looked in Ethiopia, there was nothing, so I started contacting the agricultural ministries of all the neighboring countries in East Africa. So I wrote to Kenya, KALRO, Kenyan Agricultural Livestock Research Organization. They told me, no, you cannot come. We only accept locals. I wrote to Rwanda, I wrote to Burundi, I wrote to people in Tanzania, and none of them replied. When I was getting desperate, my dad had a suggestion. He was also trying to do a project in Ethiopia, but due to health reasons, he had to abandon it. But he told me, go on Facebook and just type what you're looking for. So I started to type Sericulture, Kenya, Sericulture, Tanzania, Sericulture, Uganda. And luckily, I found Iran agro industry. So I wrote to the owner of the farm on Facebook, and I never got a reply. I had given up on that thing. But after like 3 months, I get a reply from him, and he's like, sure, come over. So the next week, I book a flight to Uganda, a country I'd never been to come meet a person I've never seen in person or even know anything about. Yeah, so he took me in. I came to the farm. I learned. I soaked in all that I could. And then COVID hit. So I ended up spending 3 months here in lockdown. But I think I was one of the really lucky people to be locked down in the village because everybody else in Kampala, they couldn't leave their house. Whereas me, I was on an open farm, going anywhere I wanted. I was completely free. I was so relaxed. The problems, however, came when I had to return back to Ethiopia. Because at that time, they were quarantining people for 2 weeks. And that's when I got my first gray hair in my beard. So, yeah.
Oh man.
So that's how I met my Ugandan contact. But the story of how I actually ended up in Uganda is a bit different. And again, like you mentioned before, politics and greater things beyond our control influence our daily life. And so I was doing a lot of research to find the ideal location for my farm because silkworms cannot be in a cold environment. They need a temperature range between 25 to 30 degrees. That's the optimal. And even if it's a bit cooler or a bit warmer, it's okay as long as it's steady. But as you know, Addis is what, 2,300 to 2,600 meters of altitude. And so in the morning could be like freezing. You need a heavy jacket. And by noon, you're cooking. So I had to go on the outskirts. And the place I had identified was in Benishangul Gumuz, which is all the way to the border with Sudan, where they've built the Great Renaissance Dam now. And I started the process of acquiring the land. But as you also know, in Ethiopia, things are so bureaucratic that it took over a year just to get the local government's approval to get the land. But I guess that worked out in my favor because a few months later, the civil war with Tigray started. And one of the most violent and impacted regions was Benishangul Gumuz. They were having daily shootings where like 20, 30 people were dying at a time. And so it quickly became clear that it wasn't not only feasible to do it there, but it wasn't safe. So I waited about a year to see how the war would progress, but things went from bad to worse. And so at that point, my mom said, "You're wasting your time here. I know you wanted to do this project in Ethiopia. That's where your heart is. That's where all your being is. But you cannot wait forever." And so she suggested that we go talk to the man I had met here, Mr. Musavi. So I came here and talked to him. He said, "Yeah, let's do a partnership." And just like that, the next week I was in Uganda. It's pretty funny because
Wow.
I'm an American passport holder and he's an Iranian, but we worked together as if nothing was there, yeah. And funnily enough,
Sure.
he was also in Ethiopia, but because of bureaucratic reasons, left and came to Uganda. So that's how I
Yeah, I mean, it's
Uganda from
fascinating.
the States.
Like, it's fascinating to hear your story where, I mean, first, I love how you find a silver lining in when things are not going necessarily your way. And it seems that luck just keeps on following you in your life. So you definitely have like something going for you there.
Yeah.
But I guess one thing that I wanted to talk about moving forward is, so you've been running this company for the past 4 years, and I'm sure that like although you've had some successes and some wins, one big part of running a company is also the challenges that you experience and also like having grit. So I want to pull back the curtain a bit and talk about the inner workings of Victoria, your company, Victoria Silk Company. So you build something that works in a very specific cultural context, but also a specific location. So when you look at the inner workings of your day-to-day, what is one thing that you think doing business in Uganda that would completely shock somebody who's in Silicon Valley?
I think the biggest shock would be, and I think that would apply to Africa as a whole, but in Uganda, it's even more extreme than Ethiopia. And that is the laid back attitude and nature of the people. It's just like laisser aller, laisser faire. So, Uganda, like, I thought Ethiopia was a really good agricultural country, but coming from Ethiopia to here, you're on the equator. You have the largest lake in Africa. You have three of the five tallest peaks on the continent, providing a bunch of fresh water. Everything is so lush and green. Like coming from Ethiopia, where it's arid and semi-arid, you're like, why aren't these people like doing more with the land? So here, you mostly people they just plant matoke, which is a version of banana, not plantain or banana, but they call it matoke, and they call it a lazy crop because you just plant it and then the rain takes care of the rest,
And it just
and then
grows.
they just go in the garden and harvest it. So sometimes people come here to my farm to work. They like come looking for jobs and I always welcome them. But sometimes it feels like I have to convince them to work. They're very comfortable with the way the situation is. Yeah. If you know Amharic, you know what Chigriyelam means. And it's kind of like that here.
No, no
There's no
problem.
problem.
It's like there's no problem.
No.
There's never no problem.
One thing every Ugandan will tell you is Uganda is free. And by that, they mean it in every sense of the word.
But I'm sure that there are aspects of that too that you enjoy. I mean, even hearing about some of the stories that you shared, maybe sometimes going slower allows you to look at those peaks that you're talking about, or take a vacation or whatever it is. So I can see the pros and the cons around it, but definitely something to point out.
Yeah.
But also being an entrepreneur comes with its own cost as well. So I wanted to talk a bit more about what that hidden cost actually looks like. So as you reflect on your journey, like what's one of the heaviest personal costs that you had to take in order for you to start this business and also run it?
So the very first cost was leaving home. When my mom said, "Why don't we go to Uganda?" my first answer to her was, "Why are we going to a country where we don't know the language or the culture?" So I left behind my house, my friends, my dog. So that was the first step. But then, after I think the first year, my mentality shifted and I realized that Uganda was my new home because it was the country that welcomed me and was allowing me to live out my dream of doing this sericulture project. So that was the first cost. The other cost, which I feel every day, is the physical one. You were saying like the speed of life here can allow you a bit more vacation and stuff like that. But in the silk farm, it's really not the case because you have two components. You have the farming side where you grow the mulberry, which you then feed to the silkworms, the mulberry leaves, not the fruit. And the other is the actual rearing and care of the silkworm. And so both of these things are live. So you always have to give it constant attention and care. When we incubate the eggs and hatch them, I don't go anywhere for the entirety of the month until production is finished because you really can't afford to take your eyes off things. And so the cost is the physical one. When we have long days, I really feel the toll on my knees, my back, because we can have a day where we start working at 7 o'clock when it's sunlight and we can be in the rearing house until 10, 11, 12. We've even been there up until 2 o'clock at night. So that's 14 hours of work, of being on your feet, of moving up and down. So I would say also the physical cost. And we're right on the equator, so the sun is pretty harsh too.
Oh man, um, when you put it that way, like this is a commitment. It feels like you're taking care of a newborn for years with no end, always like
Yeah,
caring and
except there's
tender
4
to
million of them at a
something else's
time.
needs. Exactly. There's 4 million of them at a time.
And right before you called me, you heard what happened, you know? There's not only the silkworm or field aspect, there's also the people managed aspect of it.
Not for sure, and we're definitely gonna get into that piece a bit more. But you started your journey with this idea that was like this idea that came from you experiencing somebody's scarf that you thought was very soft and also having some ambitions in the agriculture space. So both of these ideas found their way together through this opportunity, and you've had many experiences that I'm sure have challenged you. So if the old you can basically look at the new you, in what ways would you say that you've grown and this experience has shaped how you lead today?
So when I first came here, I didn't have any experience. So I was kind of following the lead of my partner. But I soon and quickly found out that we had very different time targets. And one thing that always gets in the way between me and my partner is I propose to him something and I want to do it. I want to implement it quickly because, like I mentioned before, it's living plants and living insects. You cannot say, oh, let's do it in 6 months' time. And his answer would always be, Inshallah. So,
Chikirilam. No
Shukriya.
problem.
So, one thing that has drastically changed is I've taken control of the whole farm. In the beginning, I was kind of following the lead of my partner, but now I'm running all of the operations, and my partner's in Kampala.
So seems like this journey has just helped you have more confidence in yourself and take ownership. But I'm sure you're not the only one who's also growing and evolving through this journey. So
Correct.
would be curious to hear how you've been impacting others too and helping them grow or change. If you could share a story that can maybe help our listeners have a better idea of what that part looks like.
So one of the key things that helped change this is simply experience and nothing else. Sometimes you have to fail to learn. Uh, Regarding the change in people's lives, so there is an existing sericulture industry in Uganda, but it's government driven. Ours is completely private, and so one of the things that happens when it's government money is that it gets very easily mismanaged. Things are supposed to be allocated for certain things. It doesn't get done. People fight over it. There's always a political game. And so one thing I have paid particular attention to is staying far away from that. But the reason I bring up this is that they created a sericulture in this. They trained people, but they weren't providing them with a livelihood. They weren't producing, they weren't running operations, they weren't farming silkworms. They just took the money, bought land, bought the equipment, and then proceeded to do nothing with it.
Yeah.
So there was this large talent pool of people that knew how to do this, but were doing other things because they were forced to and they had no choice. I believe that with me, they found a home, and I with them found a family. And I realized that one time when we ran out of leaves, funny enough. So we went to a farm about 80 kilometers away, and we were harvesting leaves from there and shipping them here. And at the end of the day, one of the guys said, we've come to from Kajumiro to Mubende, and we followed you. But he said, his name is Kenzo. Kenzo told me,
Okay.
Logan, you and I, we're going to be together for life. And that's when I really understood the impact I was having on the people working for me. And yeah, it made me a bit emotional.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a beautiful symbiotic relationship. I mean, you said you studied biology, so you're both benefiting from this relationship in different ways and growing from it. So it's a win-win.
Mhm.
So you've taken us through your journey, where you grew up in your origin, as well as how this idea even came up and what the day-to-day life looks like. So I'd like to end us by looking at what is coming up, or like looking into the future. So I know you have bigger ambitions than just being a silk farmer. or silkworm farmer. Am I right? Am I getting that right? Um, so curious to hear from you. Like, what does the future hold for you, and what do you plan to do with your business long term?
So I have a two-phase, two-strategy approach to this question. The first is that I want to continue on the value chain of silk. So currently we're exporting unprocessed, just simply dried cocoons to China. We have to dry them because if they're not dried, the the silk moth emerges from the cocoon, and when they emerge, they bite a hole through, and you lose 70% of your product. So drying it is the minimum requirement in terms of processing. But once our cocoons reach China, they go to a huge factory where it's then reeled into silk yarn. So hopefully things go well if we steady our production and our quality, which I think we will do.
Yep.
Very well on the way of doing it, is to create a small industrial park in Kampala where we can send our cocoons, dry them, and turn them into silk yarn, but also eventually maybe to also then process it into silk fabric. So that's where I want to go on the value chain side. Then the second phase or the second aspect of my ambition is to share and grow this industry. Like I mentioned before, I want all the farmers around me to be able to produce small batches of silkworm. If they have 1 acre, half an acre, they can do half a box or 1 box. I provide them with the third stage silkworms. So just very quickly, silkworms have 5 stages, 5 instars. They start from eggs, which we incubate for about a week. Then each stage takes about 3-4 days until you reach the fifth stage, which is about a week long. That's when they eat nonstop and convert all the food into silk yarn. But the hardest part in the silkworm production is the young age. That's when they're most sensitive, and that lasts until the third instar. So what I would like to do is get the eggs, hatch them, grow them out to the juvenile stage, and then give them to the farmers, and they just keep them for 2 weeks and then give me back the cocoons.
Hmm.
And that has actually started. There is this girl that I've met that was also working on the value addition chain, but her aspect was a bit more artsy, and she was transforming the cocoons into chandeliers, into earrings, and into necklaces. And so now she wants to produce her own cocoons. When we first met, she wanted to buy cocoons, but she had such a small requirement to do the necklaces and the earrings that I was giving her the cocoons for free. But now I'm guiding her on every step of the way because I failed many times and I failed in every way imaginable.
Yeah.
So now I know how to do
Yeah.
this even with my eyes closed. And I think my guidance is really helping her get to where she needs to be much faster. And so I would like to do that, not for only one person, but to have many people doing that. I want to grow this industry.
Yeah. I think there's like three aspects of your growth plan that really stood out to me. The first one is the value chain addition, which I think is very relevant, not just for your industry, but for a lot of agricultural components in the African continent. So cacao is like another one.
Yes.
I think the next one is also growth, but growth through through mentorship and partnership. where you're mentoring newcomers on how to enter this business, but also with your different phased approach that you talked about, how you're like getting people started and allowing them to be involved and participate in this ecosystem, which I think is like super commendable, but also very forward thinking as we think about how can we make the continent even more resilient and add value to global economies. So I think those things really resonated with me.
Yeah. One point, my Chinese teacher, Miss Chen, the one that taught me in Alag, Ethiopia.
Ethiopia. Yeah.
Yeah, she was vehemently against me doing this because
Oh, wow.
she said, Logan, this job is so difficult. I don't want you to do it. She said, do trading, do something easy, do something more comfortable. This is really hard. And I told her, no, Miss Chen, you have taught me. I've taken in all the things, all the knowledge, and I've absorbed it, and I'm so thankful. But I told her I want to be the first one. I want to be a pioneer. She told me in China, we say that the first guy to go on the boat is the one to sink.
Sink first. Well,
Yeah, to sink
aren't you
first.
happy that I'm sure you're happy that you listened to your inner voice and maybe now was it you said her name was Mrs. Chen?
Miss Chen, yeah.
So maybe Miss Chen now will be proud of you. So
Oh, she
maybe
is.
you proved her wrong.
We're
Who
in
knows?
constant communication. But I'm
There you
bringing
go.
up that small anecdote because for it to work, people have to see you succeed. You can say I was adventurous and I was strong-willed and I reached this point through determination, through failure, through the help of so many people encouraging me, teaching me, nurturing me. But ultimately, if you don't show them how and what the potential is, I don't think they're going to be very incentivized or motivated to try it. So
No,
our success can work as a beacon.
no, I agree. And I think that's a great way to wrap this up. I really, really enjoyed this conversation, Logan. Thank you for sharing your story. And hopefully, this can inspire other entrepreneurs to also take a bet on themselves and do something or start a business, like follow their calling.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. And if anything, I hope this inspires people not only to do what they want, but also to come back to their roots and improve the place that raised them and formed them.
For sure. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, what would be the best way? Is there an email address you can share?
Yeah, I can share with you my email address.
Okay.
Do you want me to state it or should I write it for you?
Just state it in case somebody's listening to this through audio. I think that will make it easier for them to note it down.
Okay, so it's Victoria Soul Farm at gmail.com.
Perfect. All right, Logan, this was a pleasure. See you.
Thank you so much. See you soon. Bye.